Hi, welcome to a new episode in the Internet Surfer, hosting the most horror and creepiest stories from Reddit. Please don't forget to comment, like, share, and subscribe. Enjoy.
Stories of creepypasta are great, but does anyone have any good true creepy stories? Serious. Episode 10. I met a guy my mom dated back in high school. I was about 13. My parents and brother were out doing something or other, I was alone. We had 3 dogs at the time, one was a Weimaraner. Doorbell rang. Dogs kind of go nuts a little. I go to the door, the Weimaraner, a 130 pounds male, is doing his usual big bad excited thing. Weird guy I've never seen before at the door. I say hi. He says he then asks, is Mom's first name Mom's maiden name here? Yeah, but she's Mom's first name Mom's last name now. She's out right now. I was allowed to tell people this now, 'cause my parents figured between me being 6 feet 2 inches and the weem plus another big dog anyone that wanted to try and force their way in with just me there was going to be in for an extremely poor day. Oh, okay. Well, if you could tell her guy's name stopped by to say hi, I'd appreciate it. Here's my card. He hands me his card, then stops and asks, oh, is that the name of Mom's childhood dog, long dead, who was also a Weimaraner? No, he's been gone for a while. Oh yeah, sorry, my mistake. I close the door, think it's weird, but whatever, people can be weird. Go back to doing whatever I did. Mom and Dad came home. Usual stuff ensues, then I mention the guy and hand Mom the card. She and Dad look at it. First time ever I think I've seen both of them go white. Actually, truly terrified. Like mortally afraid and upset but trying not to lose it. Mom holds the card like it's a loaded gun that was pointed at my head. Looks at Dad, and he walks off to the kitchen, calls my grandparents, Mom's sibling, and her spouse, starts to explain things. A family meeting over dinner is planned. I've never seen my parents like this. While he's on the phone he's getting ready to go haul my brother home from whatever he was up to at the time and is locking all the doors. I think at one point he asks Mom if she wants him to get one of the handguns out, but she says no. He leaves, says he'll be back soon. Mom puts the card in the kitchen, then sits down by me, and tells me what is going on. She dated this guy in high school. Her younger sibling dated his younger sibling too. Cute story. Mom and this guy break it off eventually, so do their siblings. Nothing acrimonious, only normal high school stuff. Mom and the guy and the rest of their class graduated. That summer the guy turns 18. The night of his birthday he murders his entire family. Mom said the whole town was in shock, totally taken aback by it. Rumors spread. Some people thought the dad could be abusive, was distant and cold towards his son, suspected maybe he hit him from time to time. At trial, it comes out that his dad, the minute he turned 18, threw him out of the house, hitting him, chasing him off the property. Allegations are made by his mother. His sibling did nothing to stop it. Later that evening he came back, broke in, and killed his father, then his mother, then his younger sibling. Cops found him covered in blood sometime the next day, wandering in a daze. I never looked up much of the record, I guess the abuse angle got raised but wasn't pushed hard, don't know how it played into his sentencing. He got put away for just short of 30 years, got a little time shaved off for helping set up an inmate rehab program. Mom and Dad look up the records. He just got out. They figure he must have been trying to make amends, maybe re-establish old connections, they're not sure. Family meets up, kids all kept at one house in another room, and discuss the situation. Basically, go on lockdown for a while. Kids are never left home alone. School teachers and counselors for all the family's kids are told about the guy, told to call police if they see him. We're told to tell our friends to report if anyone unusual starts to ask about us. I get to explain to my friends that my family's terrified that the guy my mom used to date who just got out of prison for killing his family might randomly show up at my school to try and talk to me for God knows what reason. He never tries to contact any of us again. Eventually sometime later mom sees an article, she'd set up a Google alert for his name, and finds he's been caught with child porn. With previous crimes he's sentenced to basically life in prison, and by the time he gets out he'll be well over 70. So yes. Not exactly all that dangerous, but my own personal brush with a guy that killed his entire family then just showed up at my house cause my mom dated him for a while back when they were in high school. Not exactly Stephen King, but it was creepy enough at the time. Occasionally, I will have strange dreams. Now, most of my normal dreams are fuzzy and out-of-body-ish, and I'm fairly sure this is normal with most people. Sometimes though, I will have the dreams. My extremely religious mother-in-law calls them premonitions, but I'm still a little skeptical. The dream is mundane usually. It isn't wacky or physics-defying. It's just as normal as waking life. There is intense clarity. I can recall the smells, the sights, the sounds, the textures with crystalline accuracy. My memory in normal life is about average, but I can remember every single detail about every single one of the dreams. The events in the dreams are normal, but foreign. Most dreams are about things that you've seen whether consciously or subconsciously. The dreams, however, are always of things I've never done or seen before. I always wake up from them with cold chills. The most mundane dream I've had was this: I was sitting in a dark theater, holding the hand of a boy. I was looking at the speaker on the wall to my right, noticing a cobweb. The particular scene in the movie was a young boy fiddling with a radio, and I was looking right at the speaker as the static jumped around. I had this dream in 2006, when I was 13. In 2011, I went to watch the movie Super 8 with my boyfriend. I was getting restless and started to fidget. My boyfriend reached over and held my hand, whispering to me to stop wiggling. I looked over and noticed a cobweb on the speaker box on the wall to my right, and the boy on screen started fiddling with a radio. Exactly as I dreamt 5 years earlier. Then I felt intense déjà vu, and a cold in my stomach. The scariest dream I've ever had was this: I walked from the kitchen to the living room. I feel the linoleum change to carpet under my feet, my socks snagging on the runner that separates the two floor types. The room is small, lit by a large lamp. A baby in a pink and cream on-site pulls itself to a standing position using the TV cabinet. I look down to mark my spot in a book, and when I look back up the baby has fallen back, and its face is blue. I wake up in a cold sweat and run to the bathroom to be sick. I dreamt this in 2003 when I was 10. When I was 14, one of my mom's work friends had just gotten a new apartment. She asked me to babysit her little girl while she and her boyfriend went on a date. It was the little girl's bedtime, and I dressed her in the on-site laid out by her mom. Pink and cream. I walked into the kitchen to grab her bottle, and when I walked back into the living room my socks snagged on the runner. I felt cold in my stomach, and I watched the little girl pull herself up using the TV cabinet. I was planning to put away my books and put her to bed, but I rushed over to grab her instead. She was holding a bottle cap in her tiny fist. Déjà vu nausea. I saw her die in my dream, 4 years earlier. When I was about 14, my mother worked at a small hospital as a registered nurse. Over the course of a few months, 6 or 7 hospital employees, the doctors and nurses, have loved ones either die or become seriously injured. One's daughter was killed in a car accident, another's husband abruptly died of pneumonia, another's husband committed suicide. Nothing was happening to anyone who worked there, just people they knew. It seemed like every other day my mom would come home with some more grim news. She said people there got scared whenever the phone rang, dreading the latest. It actually scared the hell out of me. I was worried something would happen to me. Thankfully, nothing ever did. Also, my mom said a few people had thought the hospital was haunted. Someone heard breathing right behind their neck, a few people felt like they were being watched, a room call button would go off with no one in there, etc., etc. Talked to me about it and she cleared some things up I was foggy about. I was in my last year of university and living with 2 other girls in a house off campus. That week we heard news about a raping that had happened where the girl was left savagely beaten behind a dumpster in our neighborhood. Luckily, she ended up being found and fully recovered in a hospital and was able to give the description of a white male wearing a dark hoodie. He followed her home one night. One night we all decided to go out, but each girl had different plans. I ended up arriving home around 3 a.m. to a sleeping roommate on the couch in the front living room and figured our last housemate, let's call her Danielle, was staying over at her boyfriend's. I ended up drifting off on the other couch. Sometime around 4 a.m. frantic knocks startled us both to wake. Very cautiously, we opened the door and were relieved to see Danielle and a man who we did not recognize. She was noticeably unnerved and ran into the house, and shut the door, but not before myself and my roommate saw the man take off from behind her. She finally calmed and told us that this man in a dark hoodie had been following her a few blocks. If we hadn't opened the door then, or if we hadn't both been sleeping on the couch in the front room, where we could easily hear the door, he would have grabbed her or done whatever he had planned. In college, a group of friends and I would research haunted/creepy/abandoned places and drive out to explore them. We'd often get places from websites, books, hearsay, basically any way we could back then, so it's safe to say a decent portion of our leads were probably made up. Regardless of that, we explored our fair share of abandoned houses, mental facilities, and haunted areas. Realistically, the biggest danger we ever encountered would have been angry squatters, but you never know. We did hear a woman screaming for help and what sounded like a gunshot at an abandoned mental facility, but after exploring extensively and finding nothing, someone was probably just kidding with us. One time was different though. We'd gotten a lead about a small lake in the middle of some woods where a large stone was used for rituals. We figured it was close to a good dinner, and we figured, at worst, we'd get a good omelet out of the trip. We got to the forest about dusk and parked the car and headed into the woods. There was a faint footpath that you could tell was used with irregularity. We pressed onward and knew we were strapped for time, as we didn't bring any flashlights with us. We planned to get there much earlier in the day than we did, and the forest canopy was making it much darker than it actually was. We ran into the small lake which we'd read about, but didn't see any large stone or something that might be a centerpiece for the rituals we'd read about. The footpath went deeper into the forest, so we decided to follow it for 5 more minutes and then turn back. The path slowly began to ascend a small hill and in the distance we could make out some dark blobs that appeared to hover in a slight haze. Again, it was pretty dark by this point, so it was hard to make out exactly what we were seeing. We approached slower and realized the haze was actually a tall chain-link fence. That's not the creepy part, though. The part that unnerved us was what the dark blobs were. Every 10 feet on the fence, there was a dead and decaying dog strung up to the fence, attached by a dead snake wrapped around the dog's neck and through the chain links. The fence was padlocked with a chain but not very tall. We could have jumped it, but it was dark, and we had no flashlights. It was on the top of a hill, and we weren't able to make out what was inside the fenced-off area, as it turned into a fairly steep decline. We let fear get the better of us and ran all the way back to the car, sitting in silence the entire drive home. I've always meant to go back to that place, even years later now, but I had such a feeling of sickness and dread that I can't bring myself to it. It's almost an unspoken rule that none of us even bring up that place with one another. My dad told me this story when I almost purchased a Ouija board. Now, my father's a typical Australian bloke and he's one to hold his emotions pretty well. I knew the story he told me was true once I saw the honest fear in his eyes. He started by explaining that he was very reckless when he was young, and one of his main faults was drunk driving. He explained that he had at least gone through 3 cars by the time he was 20 and had often woken up at the stump of a tree. One night he was invited to a party at a mate's house. Nothing was out of the ordinary until a shocked-looking girl came out of a room and walked up to him saying that he needed to follow her. Bit freaked out, he followed her as she walked into a dark room with a few other people in it who were all circled around a table. On the table was a Ouija board and candles. The girl explained that the ghost had asked to speak to him. Dad, thinking it was a joke, laughed and thought, all right, I'll have a crack. Once he put his hand on the dial, that's what he referred it as, guessing it to be the planchette, it reacted by moving to certain letters. It spelt out Robert. As there were 2 other people having their hands on the dial, he believed it to be them. He replied by saying, "Hi." The board then began to tell you to stop drinking. Dad still believed it was a joke considering many people knew that he did drink drive, it was common back then. The next part was what really haunted him. It spelt out "You'll end up like me," then the name of a man who no one else in the room knew but him. It was his father's friend who died when Dad was young by crashing his car after driving drunk. Needless to say, Dad never drank drive again. May not be as creepy as a lot of stories, but I believe it to be true. My parents were on their honeymoon to Key West. When they arrived at the hotel to check in, they were told that the room would be non-smoking. With my dad being a smoker, they requested a different room. They got the room switch and went to their room. As they got off the elevator, the smell of fresh paint was overwhelming. Down the hall there was a painter with all necessary supplies laid out around him and was painting the wall. As my parents walked past him, they casually greeted him, and the painter had absolutely no acknowledgement of their presence. Whatever. When they got to their room, the smell of paint was even worse in there, so bad it wasn't even bearable, so they decided to go to the front desk to change rooms. When they explained the situation, the attendant looked very confused and informed them that there wasn't a scheduled paint job on that floor for that day, but agreed to change their room. My parents go back to their floor to grab their luggage, and the painter is completely gone. All supplies cleaned up and gone within 10 minutes, and the smell of paint was completely gone. At this point my parents were freaked out but didn't think much of it and go to their new room. The next morning on their way to breakfast they overheard a tour guide talking to a group. My parents tuned in when the guide mentioned the floor that they were originally supposed to stay on. Apparently a long time ago there was a painter on that floor painting and fell down the elevator shaft to his death. Now my parents don't normally believe in the paranormal, but after an event like this that they had no explanation for, it freaked them out a good bit. My 9/11 story scared the hell out of me. I was in the U.S. Army stationed in Maryland. I was working midnight to 8 a.m., I had just got off duty, I sat down in front of my computer and fired up Diablo 2, I flipped on my tiny little TV in my barracks room for background noise. The 300 Club was on, I didn't want to get up to change the channel as I was pepping. When the first plane hit, they didn't have video of it happening right away. As soon as I saw the next plane hit the building I knew we were going to war. I didn't know at the time who the target was going to be. I banged on the barracks room next to mine, I yelled at the guy who also worked nights that we were going to war. He yelled back, "Are we going to war now?" I said, "I don't think so," to which he replied, "Wake me up when the war starts." He ended up sleeping through 9/11. At first everything was pretty calm. Some of us jumped in the car to go buy a ton of smoke in case we got locked down. I think I bought 10 cartons of Newports. I ended up driving like 100 miles an hour as we were in uniform, and if we were stopped the police officers wouldn't mess with us. When we got back to base, things got scary. Once the Pentagon got hit and got real. They started issuing weapons and live ammo. This is the first time I had ever been given live ammo inside the US when not at the range. There were rumors of what to do in case of nukes, moving a percentage of soldiers outside of probable nuclear targets to respond if we ended up getting wiped out. I remember the sounds of jets, my heart stopped for a second until I saw it was a US fighter. I thought it may have been something meaner. The skies were clear for what seemed like an eternity. The fighter came in low and really fast. He then gained some altitude and started circling us. It was a huge relief, but we were still nervously watching for incoming ICBMs. Many of us were told to go to our duty sections, others were assigned to gates. Before September 11th most military bases were completely open, you could drive in without issue. We put HMMWVs at the gates. Starting off I don't think they were armed with anything more than M16s as we didn't have heavy machine guns like the .50 cal available at that point. They were supposed to ram into anyone coming through the checkpoint, others that were in little makeshift guard posts would pepper them with small arms. I think the guys on perimeter gates were even issued air horns someone had gone out and bought. Things got scary once again when news of a fourth plane was out there. They evacuated many of the buildings, so many refused to leave, they wanted to continue working. I can't recall if the fighter actually showed up before or after the fourth plane was announced. I have to stop here as I can't really remember the details of what exactly happened next. I think all of us ended up working around 36+ hours straight. It was all an autopilot blur. Funny side story, I had qualified with the 9mm, all of us that had were issued the M9 pistol. We were allowed to wear it off base even in uniform. Normally we weren't supposed to go off base in BDUs for more than pumping gas or buying smoke. Some of us were encouraged to go off base in groups and shop/eat/whatever in uniform while armed to help calm the public. People were suddenly amazing to us. We weren't allowed to pay for anything at that point on. No one would take our money or someone else would pay for whatever we were trying to buy. I always insisted on buying my own smokes. Everything went red and white. And blue. We ended up as a nation with a thirst for blood and revenge. We didn't care who we were going to bomb, we just wanted to bomb someone. When I was in high school I was babysitting for this family I had never babysat before. They kind of had an eerie house, just kind of disorganized but with these weird masks everywhere. Anyways, there are 3 kids and it's probably about 10 o'clock. It's kind of windy outside and the power goes out. I was a little freaked out because I was really unfamiliar with the house and didn't know the kids very well. Since TV was no longer an option I was trying to think of things to do with them. The eldest girl, Jillian, started going through my purse and pulled out my camera and was just taking pictures for about a half hour. The parents came home around 12:30 and I went home. The next morning, I went through the camera to look at the pictures and in the background there was a man looking through the glass door to the backyard. He was in every picture. A few years ago, I started practicing lucid dreaming, being able to recognize the fact that you are dreaming and then being able to manipulate the dream in many ways or acting independently in the dream. One of the first things one does when trying to lucid dream is to increase dream recall by keeping a journal or log of any dream you have immediately after you wake up. I had been keeping this journal for a year or so when I first started to be able to become self-aware while I was dreaming, but something odd would always happen when I realized it. I would always seem to run into a figure inside my dreams that was this shadowy person. I put person in quotes because it was definitely not a human. The thing was always dark like it was made of shadow and as far as I could ever tell it didn't have a face. I knew that it wasn't human in the same way you just know things in any dreams. I would rarely notice it until I was able to look clearly at my surroundings and it would almost without fail be following me or hanging out in the scenery, trying so hard to blend in and not attract my attention. Everything about it was just too forced. Like it didn't know much about acting like a human. So it was this almost silly caricature watching me or following me. Every time I noticed it and started to study it, the thing would completely drop all pretense of humanity. A few times it dropped to the floor and its arms and legs were joined much like a spider and it crawled away. There were a couple of dreams where it would start chasing me and I would be able to wake myself up. For me, there were 2 straws that broke the camel's back. Number 1 was a phenomenon called sleep paralysis, http://en.wikipedia.org/wiki/sleep_paralysis, that started to affect me whenever I woke myself up from a lucid dream. I would be unable to move, but I would be in a semi-awake state where I would be looking out into my bedroom where the shadow man, what I eventually started calling him, would be sitting, or standing, or crawling. And if you haven't read the link on sleep paralysis, I'll just tell you it is not fun. The other thing that turned me off at the whole idea was me rereading through a couple of years' worth of dream journaling, 2 to 3 dreams a night, almost every night for 2 years. I started to realize that this recurring nightmare figure had been along for the whole ride. Almost every nightmare that I cared to write about featured some sort of faceless shadowy figure. And I had taken to sketching some of the more evocative dreamscapes and figures to aid in memorization, and seeing drawings of him that I drew a couple of years before I started to really notice him was actually quite terrifying. I have 2 separate stories that I hope don't get buried here. Both of these stories take place at an old house I used to live in that literally looked like it belonged to a horror movie. I live in a rich area with huge houses and nice yards and all that, and then there's my house. My house creaks a lot. Any step you take, the floors will creak, every now and then the walls will make a random thumped sound, probably the pipes. The basement though was the creepiest part of the house. My family and I never did anything about it, and was absolutely terrifying to be in. There's a stray light bulb in the middle of the room, the wall paint was peeling, and these 2 random Chinese paintings resting on the floor. Other than that, it's a completely empty basement. The first part of the story deals with this basement. I can't express enough the fact that nobody in my family ever goes down to the basement. One night, I was lying in bed trying to sleep. It was about 2 or 3 a.m. at this time. In a normal night, there's the usual silence being ruined by the occasional wall noises. However, tonight was a bit different. As I was drifting to sleep, I hear a large bang beneath my bed. Being too terrified to move, I laid tight on my bed, freaking out at every noise I heard. Until morning, I didn't dare leave my room. The next morning, I go down to my basement to find a random barbell with 30 pounds weights on it. Nobody in my family awoke from the bang, and nobody knows how it got there. Just a random set of weights appeared in my basement. The next story is possibly more of me seeing things, but it still creeps me out when I think about it. Like any normal person, sometimes during the night I have to get up and use the bathroom. The way my house is set up is there's my room with the bathroom a couple steps over. Connected to my room and the bathroom is the living room with a mural straight across my room door. At night, the mural is reflective, so when my room light is on, I can see myself in the reflection. Every time I get up in the middle of the night, I always turn on my light, look across the hall and see my reflection. It turned into a habit, and I always do it. Well, after a night of drinking a lot of water before heading to bed, I had to go use the bathroom in the middle of the night. As I open my door and turn my light on, I look down the hall at the mural. Unlike every other time, I saw my reflection, but that's not all. There was a woman right behind me in my room in the reflection. I've never seen something so clear in my life. I freaked out, turned around, and of course saw nothing. When I looked back at the mural, all I saw was myself. But I'll never forget the sight of this woman slouching behind me. I can't say I believe in ghosts, but this will always give me chills. My dad told me this story about a trip he took to Africa doing some non-profit work. One night, he and a friend stayed in this one hotel. In the middle of the night, he wakes up to his friend in the bed across the room shaking and sweating and reading a Bible by flashlight. He questioned his friend about what was wrong, but the guy was just really shaken up and didn't want to discuss it. They both laid back down and did their best to go to sleep. A few hours later my dad got up to go to the bathroom. He walked into the bathroom and there stood an African woman staring off into space. He turned away for a moment and then turned back and she was gone. He was completely unnerved by this and the way his friend was freaking out, and so he turned around and walked back to his bed and lay down. As he lay there he said to her, all of a sudden caught a whiff of body odor, which is normal for a lot of the local people as deodorant isn't a big deal. He turned to look beside him and there was the woman lying flat on her back, staring at the ceiling. The next morning, he asked his friend what had shaken him up so badly the night before. His friend had seen her too. When I was little, I used to have dreams about my father coming into a room with an axe. For years, I had dreams about it. It was really conflicting for me because my dad was an awesome, amazing dad, SAHD until I was 5, and I couldn't understand why I was having those dreams. Seemingly unrelated but completely relevant, 2 days before my grandmother died, she and my mom and I were at our city's downtown indoor farmers market. As we were leaving the building, an old woman in a long, purple dress and shawl grabbed my mother's forearm. I was 4 years old and remember it clearly as day. "You must not go back," she said to my grandmother. "You mustn't go back to him." I remember my grandmother staring silently, calmly, without responding. She took the woman's hand off her arm and walked away. I remember the woman screaming, "You cannot go back to him," as my frightened mother scooped me up and hurried after her. Yes, 2 weeks later, my grandmother's husband, not my grandfather, shot her in the head. And those axe dreams I'd been having? Turns out that whenever my grandmother and her husband would stay at her house, my dad would keep an axe next to the bed because her husband gave him the creeps. One time, when I screamed from a nightmare or something, he came running in with said axe, thinking I was in crazy trouble. He didn't tell me the truth about any of this until I was 15. It's the early 1980s and I'm in grade 10. I play in the concert band, and we do a performance at the school one evening in late fall. It all goes well and I'm walking home by myself afterwards, would say it's around 10 p.m. The town that I grew up in has a bunch of walking paths. It's dark out but the paths are well lit and perfectly safe. I was not on high alert at all, just happily moseying my way home like any other day. I'm almost there, just one more gradual slope up a hill, over the bridge, turn right and I'm home. I reach the beginning of the long uphill slope to the bridge, and I look up and stop dead in my tracks with an eerie sense of dread. It takes a few seconds to process why. There is a man standing at the top of the hill, probably 50 yards away just before the bridge, and he's looking at me. It's not unusual to see other people along this path, it's fairly well traveled during the day. But it's night and there's no one else around, just me and this guy. Then I realize what made me stop so suddenly. I can only see his silhouette as the lights from the road behind him outline his shape. But he's standing there akimbo, hands on his hips, and he's wearing a top hat. So, all of this takes about a second to process and I realize I'm just standing there at the base of the hill looking up at him. I can sense something that can only be described as pure evil. I know he's looking right at me and, for a brief moment, I'm paralyzed. I can feel him looking at me. My rational brain takes over and I'm able to step off the path and move behind some trees that block his view of me. I quickly go through my options, keep walking up the path because obviously my mind is playing tricks. Either I saw something that wasn't there or it's just some guy walking his dog, right? Okay, so I slowly peek out from behind the tree and there he is, in the exact same spot, in the exact same stance, still looking directly at me and still wearing that top hat. Oh, and did I mention the sense of pure evil piercing though my very core? Yes, still there. Option number 2, run like hell, which is what I did. To this day, I still regret running away. It bothers me that I'll never know exactly who or what that was, waiting for me at the top of the hill, right before the bridge. Did it really happen? In my mind, absolutely. But I can't be sure. If it happened today, I would run up the hill towards him just so I could find out what it really was. If I ever see him again, I will. But it's been over 30 years and still no sign of him. Walking home one night by myself, I saw pure evil in a top hat. I ran away. I can finally contribute. I used to work for Geek Squad handling inbound inquiries about services calls that had already been scheduled. People would call in to either cancel or reschedule their appointments. For the most part, the job was pretty mellow, but there was one particular call that gave me the chills. It was a Saturday night, and I was eagerly waiting to get off my shift. It was particularly quiet that night, so I figured I wouldn't get any more calls, and I started to pack up early. Literally a minute before the end of my shift, a call comes in. I reluctantly answer the phone. "Geek Squad, this is Agent David, how can I help you?" The lady on the other end is calm, but noticeably distraught. She begins to tell me that she has received several calls from our organization for an in-home service that was scheduled to occur on August 10th. I asked for her name, city, state, and zip code. This was standard procedure and necessary in order to pull up her customer profile. I found her profile and confirmed that she does have a service scheduled for August 10th. This is where things start to get a bit creepy. The woman on the other line tells me that she never scheduled any services and that the calls have actually been asking for her mother. After reading the notes on her account, I see that it was her mother that set up the service. My first thought was that her mother scheduled a service for herself, but the original rep accidentally set the appointment up for her daughter. This was not entirely uncommon, as the customer database would often bring up family members associated with a specific surname, address, city, or state. Another possibility was that the lady on the other line used her mother's visa to pay for a previous service with us. When this is done, the name of the cardholder would automatically become the primary contact on the account. I did my due diligence and asked all these questions to the customer. The lady on the other line trembled. She said unfortunately this is not possible. When I asked why not, she told me that her mother had died 3 years ago. To make things even more creepy, she passed away on August 10th. Both of us on the line were really freaked out. Ghost Mom scheduled a Geek Squad technician to visit her daughter's home on the anniversary of her death. I lived in Savannah, Georgia for 10 or so years. One night my SO and I were both startled awake at the exact same time, and without looking, we asked each other simultaneously, "Are you awake?" Just as we were about to giggle, the loud-ass rotating fan we keep by the side of the bed died. This is usually no big deal, the old city has blackouts all the time, but we didn't have long to think about it. About 2 seconds after the fan turned off, just long enough for us to finish turning our heads in response to the new silence, our bedroom door started violently and loudly rattling, like a panicked person on the other side was trying to open the locked door. I didn't really think about it, I just instantly made the assumption that our small timid female roommate might be in trouble. In full-on paternal adrenaline mode, I leapt out of bed, grabbed the shaking doorknob, and swung the door open. Not only was there no one there, but the door wasn't even locked. I could see the whole apartment from that doorway. It was dark, completely empty, and dead quiet. I hear the fan turn back on. The whole event was probably only a minute or two long, from waking up to the fan coming back on again. Not much happened after that. I scanned the house for intruders, checked on my passed-out snoring roommate, and we tried to go back to sleep as the creepiness factor slowly worked its way into our awareness.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.